The evening sky had turned dark hours ago as Thomas Wilson drove his black sedan down the quiet suburban road. Streetlights cast long shadows across his tired face. As the first African-American FBI director in the country's history, his days were always long, but today had been especially draining. A 3-hour meeting with the Attorney General about a high-profile case had left him mentally exhausted. Thomas loosened his tie and rolled down the window, letting the cool night air help keep him alert for the final stretch home. The road was nearly empty at this hour, just past midnight. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of papers from his briefcase on the passenger seat. He thought about calling his wife, Lisa, but decided against it. She was probably asleep by now, and he'd be home in 20 minutes anyway. Thomas smiled thinking about how she always left a plate of food in the microwave for him on late nights, no matter how many times he told her not to wait up. The sudden flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror broke his train of thought. Thomas checked his speedometer. He was going just 2 miles over the limit. Nothing to worry about, probably just a routine check. With 30 years in law enforcement, Thomas had conducted countless traffic stops himself in his early days. He knew the drill better than most. He put on his turn signal and pulled over to the right, stopping carefully on the shoulder. The patrol car stopped about 10 feet behind him. Thomas reached for the glove compartment to get his registration, then remembered he'd emptied it earlier that week when cleaning his car. His wallet with his driver's license was in his jacket pocket, but his FBI credentials were in his briefcase in the trunk where he placed them after changing into more comfortable clothes after the meeting. Thomas turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel, a habit from years of training other agents on proper procedure during stops. He watched in the side mirror as an officer approached. The beam of a flashlight bounced along the side of his car. Just a routine stop, Thomas whispered to himself. Though something in his gut told him otherwise, a feeling he'd learned to trust during his 3 decades of service. The officer walked up slowly, flashlight beam moving from the license plate to the interior of the car, then directly into Thomas's eyes through the driver's window. Thomas squinted against the harsh light, but kept his hands visible on the wheel. "Good evening, officer," Thomas said in a calm, respectful tone. The officer didn't return the greeting. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that seemed unnecessary for a simple traffic stop. "My registration is in the trunk with my briefcase. My wallet is in my jacket in the backseat. I'll need to reach for it," Thomas explained clearly, still not moving his hands from the wheel. The officer's posture stiffened. "Don't move," he ordered, the flashlight beam unwavering. "Why is your ID scattered all over the vehicle? That seems suspicious to me." Thomas took a slow, deep breath. This wasn't his first experience with an officer whose approach seemed disproportionate to the situation. As FBI director, he'd implemented training programs specifically addressing these scenarios, teaching de-escalation and the importance of treating all citizens with respect regardless of appearance or circumstance. "I understand your concern, officer. I changed clothes after a late meeting and placed different items in different locations. I'm happy to show you my identification. I just want to make sure you're comfortable with me reaching for my wallet." A second set of flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Another patrol car pulled up. Thomas felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach, the same one he'd felt many times before he became the director, when he was just another black man being pulled over at night. As Thomas watched 2 more officers approach his vehicle, he wondered if this would be a routine stop after all. Little did he know, the next few minutes would change everything, not just for him, but for police departments across the country. The officer kept his flashlight trained on Thomas's face, the bright beam making it hard to see the man behind it. Thomas blinked, his eyes watering slightly from the harsh light. The second patrol car's headlights added to the glare, creating an almost theatrical spotlight effect on his sedan. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer ordered, his hand moving to rest on his holster. Thomas noticed the supple shift in posture and felt a chill run through him despite the mild spring night. "Officer, I'd be happy to step out, but may I ask why?" "I believe I was just going slightly over the speed limit," Thomas replied, keeping his voice steady and respectful. Years of training had taught him how to remain calm in tense situations. I said step out of the vehicle now, the officer repeated, this time with a sharp edge to his voice that left no room for discussion. Keep your hands where I can see them. Thomas slowly unbuckled his seatbelt with deliberate movements. I'm unbuckling my seatbelt now, he narrated, knowing that clear communication could help diffuse potential misunderstandings. He opened the door carefully and stepped out onto the asphalt. The cool night air hit him as he stood to his full height. The officer, now identifiable by the nameplate reading Officer Reynolds, took a step back. Thomas stood a few inches taller than him, his broad shoulders filling out his casual button-down shirt. Hands on the car, spread your legs, Officer Reynolds commanded, gesturing with his flashlight toward the sedan's roof. As Thomas complied, placing his palms flat against his car's roof, the two officers from the second patrol car approached. Their nameplates identified them as Officer Chen and Officer Daniels. They flanked Thomas on either side, creating a triangle formation around him. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Chen asked his colleague, eyeing Thomas with suspicion. Driver was acting nervous, couldn't produce identification, has items scattered throughout the vehicle, Officer Reynolds replied, as if Thomas wasn't standing right there. Says his ID is in the back seat and trunk. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking. Officers, if you'll allow me to explain. Nobody asked you to speak. Officer Daniels cut in, his voice carrying a hint of something that made Thomas's stomach tighten. It was a tone he'd heard before, one that had nothing to do with speeding violations and everything to do with the color of his skin. Officer Reynolds began patting Thomas down with more force than necessary, checking for weapons or contraband. His movements were rough, pushing Thomas harder against the car than protocol dictated. You think you're special or something? Officer Reynolds muttered, just loud enough for Thomas to hear. Driving through this neighborhood in a nice car, thinking the rules don't apply to you? Thomas kept his face neutral despite the inappropriate comment. He'd been through this before, but it had been years, not since he'd reached the upper echelons of the FBI. He'd almost forgotten how it felt to be reduced to nothing but assumptions based on appearance. My wallet is in my jacket on the back seat, and my work identification is in my briefcase in the trunk, Thomas explained calmly once more. I'm happy to show you both if you'll allow me. Officer Chen snorted. Work identification? What kind of work you do that's got you out this late? Before Thomas could answer, Officer Daniels was already opening the back door of the sedan, reaching for the jacket Thomas had mentioned. He roughly searched through the pockets, pulling out Thomas's wallet and flipping it open. Thomas Wilson, Officer Daniels read from the driver's license, showing it to his colleagues but not returning it to Thomas. Address is in Westfield. That's pretty far from here. What brings you to this area tonight? I was in a meeting downtown and this is my route home, Thomas answered simply, still pressed against his car. If you check my work ID in my briefcase, it will explain why I was in a late meeting. Oh, we'll check your work ID all right, Officer Reynolds said with obvious skepticism, making air quotes with his fingers. Officer Chen, keep an eye on him. I'm going to search the trunk. Thomas heard the click of his trunk being opened, followed by the sound of his briefcase latches being unsnapped. He closed his eyes briefly, knowing what was about to happen. The officer's entire demeanor was about to change, but the memory of how they treated him, a law-abiding citizen, would remain long after this night ended. The trunk light cast a yellow glow as Officer Reynolds rummaged through Thomas's belongings. Thomas could hear items being moved around carelessly, papers rustling, and zippers being opened. He winced at the sound of something dropping onto the asphalt, probably his tablet or phone. Stand up straight, Officer Chen ordered, poking Thomas in the back. What's someone like you hiding anyway? Thomas straightened his posture but kept his hands on the car. I'm not hiding anything, officer. I'm simply trying to get home after a long day of work. Officer Daniels laughed, a short, humorless sound. Yeah, right. Everyone's innocent when they get pulled over. He moved closer to Thomas, deliberately invading his personal space. What's in the briefcase that you don't want us to see? Drugs. Money? Thomas felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. 30 years in law enforcement had taught him that showing anger would only make things worse. There's nothing illegal in my car, officer. Just work documents. Work documents, Officer Daniels repeated mockingly. What kind of work are you in exactly? Before Thomas could answer, Officer Reynolds called from behind the car. Got some kind of badge here. Probably fake. The sound of more items being shuffled around followed his words. Officer Chen turned toward his colleague. Fake badge? Like he's pretending to be a cop. He turned back to Thomas, his expression darkening. That's a serious offense, buddy. I'm not pretending anything, Thomas said calmly. If you'd allow me to explain. Hands behind your back. Officer Daniels cut him off, pulling handcuffs from his belt with a metallic clink that seemed to echo in the quiet night. You're being detained while we sort this out. Thomas felt a flash of disbelief. This had gone too far, but he knew resistance would only escalate the situation. Officer, this is completely unnecessary. I've been cooperative. Hands behind your back, Officer Daniels repeated, his voice rising. Now. Thomas slowly moved his hands from the car roof and placed them behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists as Officer Daniels secured them with excessive tightness. Thomas winced but said nothing. You know, Officer Chen said, leaning against the car casually, people who have nothing to hide don't usually get so nervous during a routine traffic stop. I'm not nervous, officer, Thomas replied evenly. I'm concerned about being handcuffed when I've done nothing wrong. Officer Daniels gave a short laugh. That's for us to decide. The dashboard camera in the patrol car continued recording the scene, its small red light blinking steadily in the darkness. Thomas noticed it and felt a small measure of relief. At least there would be a record of this encounter. Officer Reynolds emerged from behind the car, holding Thomas's leather briefcase. Let's see what's so important in here that you needed to hide it in the trunk. I wasn't hiding anything, Thomas repeated, the handcuffs digging uncomfortably into his wrists. My credentials are in the inner pocket. Your credentials, Officer Reynolds said with a smirk, mimicking Thomas's voice. He opened the briefcase wider and began pulling out folders and documents, letting some fall to the ground. Looks like a bunch of paperwork to me. Thomas watched his confidential FBI files scatter across the asphalt, some caught by the breeze and skittering into the darkness beyond the headlights. Years of work, sensitive information, all being treated like trash. Please be careful with those documents, Thomas said, his professional composure beginning to crack. They're federal government property. Oh, federal government property, Officer Daniels said, laughing and looking at his colleagues. You hear that? We better be careful. Officer Reynolds continued searching through the briefcase until his hand found a leather wallet in the inner pocket. He pulled it out, flipping it open casually. Let's see what kind of fake ID you've got in here, he said, angling the wallet toward the light. Thomas stood straight despite the discomfort of the handcuffs. In exactly 6 minutes, everything would change. The smug expressions, the mockery, the disrespect, it would all transform into something else entirely. For now, though, he was just another black man being mistreated on the side of the road, his dignity stripped away along with his freedom of movement. The small red recording light on the officer's body cameras continued to blink steadily, documenting every word, every action, every violation of protocol that would soon come back to haunt them. Officer Reynolds flipped open the leather wallet, expecting to find some amateur fake ID. The gold badge caught the flashlight's beam and gleamed brightly in the darkness. Below it was an identification card with Thomas's photo, his name, and 3 bold letters that changed everything: FBI. Reynolds squinted, bringing the ID closer to his face. His eyes widened as he read the title beneath the name, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The color drained from his face. His hands began to tremble slightly, causing the badge to catch the light in quick flashes. Everything okay over there? Officer Chen called out, noticing his colleague's sudden silence. Officer Reynolds didn't respond immediately. He was flipping through the other cards in the wallet. Government clearance cards, special access passes to federal buildings, and a personal card from the Attorney General of the United States. Reynolds, Officer Daniels prompted, growing impatient. What did you find? Fake police badge like we thought. Officer Reynolds finally looked up, his expression completely transformed. Guys, he said in a hushed tone that barely carried to his colleagues, we need to talk. Now. He gestured urgently for the other officers to join him at the trunk, away from Thomas, who remained handcuffed and standing beside the patrol car. The three officers huddled together, their whispers growing increasingly panicked, as Reynolds showed them the contents of the wallet. "This can't be real," Officer Chen whispered, though loud enough that Thomas could hear. "Why would the FBI director be driving himself at midnight?" "It's real," Officer Reynolds replied, his voice shaking slightly. "Look at the security features on the ID. You can't fake those holograms and that microprinting." Officer Daniels grabbed the wallet to examine it himself. "This has to be some kind of misunderstanding," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He flipped through the other cards in the wallet, each one confirming what they were beginning to realize was a terrible truth. Thomas stood silently, watching their panic grow. The night air had grown cooler, or perhaps it was just the sweat cooling on his skin. The handcuffs continued to dig into his wrists, a constant reminder of how quickly these officers had jumped to conclusions about him. "Well?" Thomas finally called out. "Have you confirmed my identity yet, officers?" The three men froze at the sound of his voice, which now carried a quiet authority they hadn't noticed before. They turned slowly to face him, their expressions a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and growing fear. Officer Reynolds was the first to move, practically jogging back to Thomas with the badge wallet held out like an offering. "Sir," he stammered, his earlier arrogance completely vanished. "Sir, we didn't realize. Your credentials." Thomas remained expressionless. "I believe I mentioned my credentials several times, Officer Reynolds. I also believe I'm still in handcuffs." Officer Daniels rushed forward, fumbling with his keys. "Right away, sir. I'm so sorry, sir. This is completely... we were just following procedure for..." His voice trailed off as he struggled to find an excuse for their behavior. The handcuffs finally clicked open, and Thomas brought his hands forward slowly, rubbing his wrists where the metal had left red marks on his skin. The body cameras continued to record, capturing every moment of the officer's dramatic change in demeanor. "Sir," Officer Chen said, stepping forward with Thomas's scattered papers hastily gathered into a messy stack. "Your documents. We've collected everything that fell. I hope nothing important was damaged." Thomas took the papers without comment, noting the boot print clearly visible on one of the classified folders. He carefully placed them back in his briefcase, taking his time, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "Director Wilson," Officer Reynolds finally said, using Thomas's title for the first time. "Please understand this was just a routine traffic stop that got confused. We had no way of knowing who you were." Thomas closed his briefcase with a decisive click. "Is that so, Officer Reynolds?" "No way of knowing except asking me and listening to my answers. No way of knowing except checking my identification before putting me in handcuffs." The officers exchanged nervous glances. 6 minutes ago, they had been in complete control, treating Thomas with contempt and suspicion. Now they stood awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, their entire demeanor transformed by the revelation of who they had been mistreating all along. "Sir," Officer Daniels began again, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "If there's anything we can do to make this right..." Thomas looked each officer in the eye, one by one. There's plenty we're going to do to make this right," he said quietly. "But not here. Not tonight." The three officers stood in a nervous semicircle around Thomas, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Officer Reynolds kept clearing his throat, preparing to speak and then thinking better of it. Officer Chen continuously adjusted his uniform, as if suddenly aware of how he looked. Officer Daniels couldn't seem to stop touching his body camera, perhaps wondering if there was any way to erase what it had recorded. "Director Wilson," Officer Reynolds finally managed, his voice noticeably higher than before. "I want to personally apologize for the misunderstanding tonight. If we had known who you were from the beginning..." "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Thomas interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "The way you treat someone shouldn't depend on their title or position." He straightened his shirt, which had become wrinkled during the handcuffing. "Every citizen deserves the same respect and presumption of innocence." Officer Chen stepped forward, desperation evident in his expression. "Sir, we were just following protocol for suspicious behavior. When someone can't immediately produce identification..." "I explained exactly where my identification was," Thomas said. "I asked for permission to retrieve it. Instead, you escalated the situation unnecessarily. He paused, letting his words sink in. Tell me, is it standard protocol to tighten handcuffs to the point of causing pain? Is it protocol to mock a detained individual? The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. And the comments about someone like me and what I was doing in this neighborhood. Thomas continued, looking directly at Officer Chen. Is that part of your department's official training? Chen looked down at his shoes, unable to maintain eye contact. Sir, Officer Daniels interjected, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. We can make this right. There's no need for this to go any further. We all make mistakes, and... This wasn't a mistake, Thomas said firmly. This was a pattern of behavior, one I've seen too many times throughout my 30-year career in law enforcement. Thomas turned toward his car and opened the driver's door. The officers watched in tense silence, perhaps hoping he would simply drive away and forget the incident. Instead, Thomas reached inside and pulled out his phone. I'm going to make a call to your precinct captain now. I believe his name is Captain Rodriguez, if I recall the department organization correctly. Officer Reynolds' eyes widened. Sir, it's after midnight. The captain will be at home sleeping. Perhaps we could handle this through proper channels tomorrow morning. File the appropriate paperwork. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Interesting. You didn't seem concerned about the time when you were searching my car and putting me in handcuffs. He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. The officers stood frozen, watching their careers potentially crumble before their eyes. After a brief conversation explaining who he was, Thomas handed his phone to Officer Reynolds. Captain Rodriguez would like to speak with you. Reynolds took the phone with a trembling hand and walked a few paces away. Even from a distance, the other officers could hear the raised voice coming through the speaker. Reynolds mostly listened, occasionally offering a yes, sir, or no, sir, in response. When he returned, his face was ashen. He handed the phone back to Thomas without meeting his eyes. The captain has some questions about tonight's events, Thomas explained, pocketing his phone. He's requested that all of you report to his office first thing in the morning. He's also asked that you provide copies of your body camera footage before you leave your shift tonight. Officer Daniels swallowed hard. Sir, about that footage, sometimes the cameras malfunction or the files become corrupted. Those files will not be corrupted, Thomas said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. If they are, I'll personally launch a federal investigation into evidence tampering. Are we clear? All three officers nodded quickly. Now, Thomas said, looking at his watch. I've been delayed long enough. My wife is probably wondering where I am. He picked up his briefcase and opened his car door. You'll be hearing from me officially through your department. And unofficially, he paused, meeting each officer's gaze in turn. I sincerely hope this encounter causes you to reflect on how you approach your duties. The officers watched in silence as Thomas got into his car. As he started the engine, they remained standing at attention, perhaps hoping for some last-minute reprieve that wasn't coming. Their faces reflected the dawning realization that the next day would bring consequences none of them had imagined when they decided to pull over a black man driving a nice car in a nice neighborhood. Thomas arrived home just after 1 in the morning. The lights were still on in the kitchen, and he found his wife, Gloria, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, waiting up for him despite his many reminders that she didn't need to. You're late, she said, rising to greet him with a kiss on the cheek. Then she noticed his expression. What happened? Thomas set his briefcase down carefully and loosened his tie. I got pulled over on Maple Avenue. Gloria's eyes widened slightly. She'd been married to Thomas for 28 years and understood immediately what that might mean. Are you okay? I am, he said, pouring himself a glass of water. He took a long drink before continuing. But it was educational. He told her about the traffic stop, the officer's behavior, and the dramatic shift when they discovered his identity. Gloria listened without interrupting, though her expression darkened as the story unfolded. You should file formal complaints against all of them, she said when he finished. They need to be fired. Thomas nodded slowly. They'll face consequences. But I'm thinking bigger than just these 3 officers. Gloria recognized the look on her husband's face, the same expression he'd worn when planning major bureau operations or preparing to testify before Congress. You're going to use this, aren't you? Every law enforcement officer in this country works for the people, Thomas said, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left faint marks. Some of them seemed to have forgotten that. As Thomas showered and prepared for bed, his phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. Word traveled fast, even at this hour. The police chief, the mayor, and even the governor had already heard about the incident. Each message expressed shock, apologies, and promises of swift action. Thomas didn't reply to any of them. He needed time to think. By 7:30 the next morning, Thomas was already at his office in the FBI headquarters. He'd slept little, his mind working through the implications of what had happened and what he could do about it. His assistant, Richard, entered with a concerned expression. "Sir, there are already reporters asking questions about last night. Someone leaked information about the traffic stop." Thomas wasn't surprised. "Let them ask. We're not commenting yet." Also, Richard continued, "The police chief and mayor are in the lobby. They don't have appointments, but they're insisting on seeing you." Thomas checked his watch. "Let them wait for 30 minutes, then send them in." While they waited, Thomas reviewed the body camera footage that had been sent over earlier that morning. The recordings had arrived remarkably quickly, no doubt the result of panic at the police department. Thomas watched the footage twice, noting every inappropriate comment, every violation of protocol, every moment where prejudice had clearly influenced the officer's actions. When the police chief and mayor were finally shown in, both men looked like they hadn't slept. Chief Peterson, a veteran officer with 35 years on the force, extended his hand immediately. "Director Wilson, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened last night. Those officers' actions do not reflect the values of our department." Mayor Green nodded vigorously beside him. "We've already placed all 3 officers on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Whatever disciplinary action you think appropriate, we'll support completely." Thomas gestured for them to sit. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your prompt response, but I'm not interested in simply punishing 3 officers and pretending the problem is solved." The men exchanged nervous glances. "The issues revealed last night go far beyond these individuals," Thomas continued, his voice calm but resolute. "They reflect systemic problems that exist in police departments across this country." Chief Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "Director, with all due respect, our department has one of the best diversity training programs in the state." "And yet," Thomas said, pulling up the body camera footage on his computer screen and turning it toward them, "this still happened." The men watched in silence as the video played, showing Officer Reynolds making comments about someone like you, and Officer Daniels roughly applying handcuffs while making snide remarks. Mayor Green winced visibly. "This is completely unacceptable. We'll make sure these men never work in law enforcement again." "Firing them isn't enough," Thomas said firmly. "What happened to me happens to countless citizens every day. The difference is that most of them don't have the authority I have to demand accountability." Thomas turned his computer screen back around and pulled out a folder. "I've drafted a proposal for a joint task force between federal and local law enforcement. Its mission will be to review police training, accountability measures, and community relations across the country." The chief and mayor looked surprised by this unexpected direction. "This task force will not be about punishment," Thomas explained. "It will be about transformation, about ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, regardless of who they are or what position they hold." 1 week after the traffic stop, Thomas stood at a podium in the FBI headquarters press room. Cameras clicked and flashed as journalists packed the space, drawn by rumors of a major announcement from the director himself. The incident had leaked to the press despite attempts to keep it quiet, and speculation was running wild. Thomas adjusted his tie and looked out at the sea of faces. Behind him stood a diverse group of law enforcement leaders from across the country, police chiefs, sheriffs, and federal agency heads who had responded to his urgent call. "Good morning," Thomas began, his deep voice carrying through the room without the need to raise it. "Last week, I experienced something that millions of Americans have experienced before me." He paused, making eye contact with several reporters. "I was pulled over while driving home, treated with suspicion and disrespect, handcuffed, and had my car searched, all without probable cause." The room fell silent, cameras continuing to click in rapid succession. The officers involved didn't know I was the FBI director until they found my credentials. At that point, their behavior changed dramatically. Thomas's expression remained calm, but his eyes conveyed the seriousness of his words. I've spent 30 years in law enforcement, and I've seen both the best and worst of how power can be used. He gestured to the screen behind him, which showed still images from the body camera footage. Thomas with his hands on his car, being handcuffed, officers searching his vehicle. I'm not here today to focus on these specific officers or this specific incident. I'm here because what happened to me is not unique. It happens every day across our country. The only difference is that most citizens don't have the platform I have to address it. In the front row, Chief Peterson and Mayor Green watched uncomfortably, aware that their city was now the face of a national conversation about policing. Today, I'm announcing the formation of the National Police Reform Initiative, Thomas continued. This joint task force will bring together federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to address the deep-rooted issues that lead to incidents like mine. He outlined the initiative's key components: mandatory body cameras with civilian oversight of footage, enhanced training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques, community advisory boards with real power, and clear consequences for officers who violated citizens' rights. Some will say this response is overblown for a single traffic stop, Thomas acknowledged. But this isn't about one night or 3 officers or even one department. This is about a culture that needs to change. A reporter raised her hand. Director Wilson, have the officers involved been fired? Thomas nodded. They have been terminated from their positions. But firing 3 officers doesn't solve the underlying problem. We need to focus on prevention, not just punishment. Another reporter called out, "Sir, do you believe race was a factor in how you were treated?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do, and the body camera footage supports that belief. The officers made several comments that referenced my race, both directly and indirectly." He leaned forward slightly. "But here's what's important to understand. This isn't just about overt racism, it's about split-second assumptions. It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. It's about whose explanation is believed and whose is dismissed." In the back of the room stood Officers Reynolds, Chen, and Daniels, now former officers, who had been invited at Thomas's specific request. They shifted uncomfortably as all eyes occasionally turned their way. "The 3 officers involved have agreed to participate in our initiative," Thomas explained, surprising many in the room. "They will share their perspectives on what went wrong that night and help develop training materials to prevent similar incidents." Thomas held up a thick folder. "This contains hundreds of letters I've received in the past week from citizens sharing their own experiences with law enforcement. Some good, many troubling. Each one is a reminder of why this work matters." As he concluded his remarks, Thomas looked directly into the main camera. "To every law enforcement officer watching, I believe in you and the oath you took to protect and serve. This initiative isn't about attacking police, it's about making all of us better at our jobs." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "And to every citizen who has experienced what I experienced, who felt powerless, disrespected, or afraid during an encounter with those sworn to protect you, I hear you. I see you. And things are going to change." The press room erupted with questions, but Thomas's message had already reached living rooms across America. The uncomfortable truth had been spoken by someone who understood both sides of the badge and couldn't be dismissed.